This is the CBS Evening News. I'm Charles Kuralt, sitting in for Dan Rather. Good evening. The people of Beijing won another one in the last few hours. Under cover of darkness, columns of Chinese soldiers advanced on the center of the city from all directions. Thousands of ordinary people poured out of their dwellings in the middle of the night and turned the army back. Most of the troops were not carrying weapons. One who was showed that the ammunition clip of his rifle was empty. He shouted, "The army will never shoot the people." But pro-democracy students in Tiananmen Square, thinking this was the long-awaited attempt to expel them finally from the place where they have embarrassed the government for weeks, braced for the assault and spread the alarm, and the people responded. Our coverage begins with Richard Roth in Beijing.
If it was planned as an assault, it never had a chance. An army of soldiers, 1,000 strong in its largest unit, swallowed by an ocean of civilians a few hours past midnight. The People's Army, surrounded by the people, turned back in its tracks a few hundred yards from Tiananmen Square. "Without fighting, you lost the battle," a civilian shouted to the troops in retreat, unarmed, exhausted, and engaged in what intelligence sources immediately called a huge blunder. One source said the soldiers were just an advance guard for armed riot police. But police, too, were stopped by civilians after a car in their convoy ran into a group of bystanders. Despite reports more troops were waiting out of sight, victory was celebrated on the street and in the square where the demonstrators are still encamped. Earlier today, a rally orchestrated by the government and organized down to the last detail. Even children were recruited to be part of this chorus denouncing the pro-democracy movement. It was another show staged by China's government and Communist Party, and a clear display of anti-Americanism. Government media now are calling China's turmoil the result of a conspiracy influenced from abroad, and branding the symbol of the protest movement an American statue. Tiananmen Square, though, has been like the eye of a storm, the encampment an enclave of tranquility. The hurricane blows around it.
It will be 2 weeks tomorrow since martial law was first declared. 2 weeks since Premier Li Peng said the turmoil must be ended swiftly.
But neither the troops' position throughout the capital nor the martial law decree barring public protest and banning news coverage has been able to control the course of events. In fact, nothing either side has done yet has significantly altered the equation. The confrontation between advocates of free expression and agents of the state is at a standoff, and the potential for violence makes the standoff uneasy. Richard Roth, CBS News, Beijing.
Deng Xiaoping and the other hardliners have the upper hand in the party power struggle, but they have been unable to translate that into control of Tiananmen. They have, however, started a massive effort to regain dominance over the millions of Chinese workers who joined the unprecedented campaign for democracy.
The leaders met the challenge of the 80s with the methods of the 50s. Once again, the party becomes the instrument to intimidate and suppress. It's the way the party has dominated the Chinese people for 40 years. Mandatory political education classes in every workplace.
When you're a worker, it's even easier to control you because the factory manager can take, action against you.
Ration coupons for meat, oil, and rice are controlled by the party leader at the workplace. In China, people can't buy a bicycle without the all-important permit from the work unit. The party decides who gets one. Just like the 50s and 60s, starting in the countryside, obedient farmers, workers, and school children are being marched through the streets, this time against the pro-democracy students. No, this man says, this is not spontaneous. The students have put up an American statue at Tiananmen Square, the party functionary reads, and everyone understands the word American means bad, just like the old days. And just like the old days, the party has singled out an enemy, China's most famous dissident, the astrophysicist Fang Li-jie. In contrast with the students' peaceful protest, this government demonstration dwells on violence. Beat the traitors, smash the plotters. The party rally climaxes in a symbolic ritual murder, burning a life-sized effigy of Fang.
So far, nothing the government has tried against the students is working, and the only thing destroyed in China tonight is once again the prestige of the People's Army. John Sheehan, CBS News, Beijing.
President Bush flew home today from Europe. Leslie Stahl says the president's aides are eager to highlight over here how much Mr. Bush's image has improved over there.
I'm the same guy I was 4 days ago, insisted the president. As he headed home, the question followed, does he have more bold initiatives up his sleeve?
There's no grand design out there right now. We just want to move forward.
He was asked if he thinks he's coming home a conquering hero, whether he'll get a little more respect now.
You mean along like Rodney Dangerfield kind of thing? I'm not suffered from lack of respect.
The White House organized a conquering hero's welcome. More than 1,000 flag-waving fans were lured to Pease Air Force Base in New Hampshire to hear the president call again for an end to the Cold War.
Ours is not an arrogant challenge to Mr. Gorbachev. It's an appeal in good faith. The summit was a triumph for the alliance, a triumph for ideas, and most of all, it was a triumph of hope.
Presidents have traditionally gone abroad to enhance their images at home. Mr. Bush's aides say he's already riding comfortably high in public opinion polls. They now expect him to soar. The president's chief of staff, John Sununu, said we're not going to turn our back on any time-honored successful techniques. So as the president took off for a short rest in Kennebunkport, his staff was already working on ways he can take full advantage of the personal and political boost he got out of the trip. Leslie Stahl, CBS News, Portsmouth, New Hampshire.
Still to come on the CBS Evening News, David Martin with the latest on the mystery of the gun turret tragedy. And Frank Courier on a young woman who can make a softball curve and slide and dance. Federal investigators are still looking for the cause of the April 19th gun turret explosion aboard the USS Iowa, the one that killed 47 members of the crew. David Martin reports on one line of inquiry that may help determine whether the blast was an accident or not.
The bizarre case of the battleship Iowa now has naval investigators scouring the records of Radio Shack stores in the ship's home port of Norfolk, Virginia, searching for evidence that Clay Hartwig purchased a timing device which could have set off the blast. Hartwig, who was killed in the explosion, was the captain of the middle gun in Turret 2 where the blast occurred. One of his shipmates has told investigators Hartwig showed him a timing device he had bought from Radio Shack and said words to the effect that he could blow the whole ship up. Using a Radio Shack catalog, the shipmate identified the timer he claimed Hartwig had shown him.
The shipmate subsequently refused to take a lie detector test, but investigators are pursuing the lead in an effort to come up with physical evidence to support the theory Hartwig committed suicide. However, even if investigators determine Hartwig purchased a timer, that still does not prove he took his own life.
To prove suicide, remnants of a similar device would have to be found in the debris left by the explosion. And officials say efforts to put out the fire may have washed away any evidence. Whatever the evidence, Hartwig's sister doesn't believe it.
Even if they come to my door tomorrow and tell me that my brother did commit suicide, I'll deny it. I truly believe he didn't do it.
Because Hartwig had made another Iowa sailor, Kendall Truitt, the beneficiary of a $100,000 life insurance policy, the Navy also investigated the possibility that Truitt set off the blast to collect the insurance money. Today, Truitt's lawyer claimed the investigation has exonerated his client.
If the Navy wants to reveal it, they will, and they're going to. He's going to be cleared.
The Navy says the investigation is not yet completed, and no one has been either charged or exonerated. David Martin, CBS News, the Pentagon.
Representative William Gray of Pennsylvania called today for an overhaul of ethics rules for Congress. Gray also is calling for an investigation to uncover the sorts of stories that say he's a target of an ethics investigation by the Justice Department. Gray charges news leaks about him are untrue and politically motivated. Law correspondent Rita Braver reports this is part of a larger controversy involving the ethics of politicians and the ethics of reporters.
Attorney General Dick Thornburgh told the Senate Judiciary Committee today that he will fire any Justice Department employees proved to have leaked information on criminal investigations.
These unauthorized disclosures not only threaten to compromise ongoing investigations, but they give rise to the risk of focusing unwarranted public attention on persons who may not be guilty of any criminal wrongdoing.
Thornburg said the Justice Department would not prosecute reporters, but suggested they should be assisting in the leak investigations.
Consenting to be interviewed and disclosing the source of the leaks.
A spokesman for reporters' rights categorically rejected that idea and said leak probes could have a chilling effect.
Historically, that whistleblowers have served a very patriotic purpose in this country in getting information about problems within government out before the public. And clearly the news media is the conduit to get that information there.
Congressman William Gray, who demanded a leak investigation after CBS News disclosed that the Justice Department was conducting a personnel probe involving him, today attacked what he said is the current political climate.
There is, as one of my colleagues put it, an era of ethical McCarthyism that is reigning, a political feeding frenzy which is characterized by rumor, false allegation, illegal leaks from government agencies.
But as for earlier suggestions that Justice Department investigations of Gray and other members of Congress were themselves politically motivated, Attorney General Thornburg insisted that he considers the investigations themselves proper and only their public disclosure wrong. Rita Braver, CBS News, Washington.
The government reported today that the civilian unemployment rate dipped 0.1% in May to 5.2%. But the report said that only 100,000 new jobs were created last month, the fewest in any month for 3 years, further evidence that the economy is cooling. The stock market took that as encouraging and closed at its highest level in about 20 months. Uniroyal company bowed to public pressure today and said it will no longer market the controversial apple ripening chemical Alar in the United States. Mark Phillips reports this doesn't necessarily mean, however, that apple products sold in the United States will be free of Alar.
Let the fear stop here.
The fear has been that Alar, used to enhance the appearance and prolong the shelf life of apples, can cause cancer. In announcing its voluntary withdrawal of Alar from the U.S. market today, Uniroyal, which makes the agent, claimed again that it was safe, but that it was responding to the public's concern.
I wouldn't buy it. I haven't even bought the applesauce, I'm afraid.
Fear of Alar has taken a huge bite out of Apple sales.
Oh, maybe about 30%.
So under pressure from the apple industry and with the threat of legislation in the wings, Uniroyal will now recall the Alar it has sold in the United States and reimburse growers.
So the new crop of 1989 crop will start coming on in late August, and it will be fresh without Alar.
Yet the critics of Alar say that simply banning the product here will not necessarily turn the United States into an Alar-free zone. More than half of Uniroyal's Alar output is sold abroad, and some of that could, and most likely would, find its way back. Particularly in processed apple products like juice and sauce. In fact, it is the Alar in these products, which children consume so much of, that had most raised concerns. And critics say half the apple concentrate used in this country is imported.
When you get the apple juice concentrate as a consumer, you don't want to be consuming a cancer-causing chemical that is illegal to apply here simply because it was applied in some foreign country.
We can't guarantee the product will not find its way back here into the United States.
Critics say Uniroyal could make that guarantee by not selling Alar abroad either, a step the company is unwilling to take. Uniroyal is also reserving the right to bring Alar back on the U.S. market if tests by the EPA prove it's safe, or at least that the risks are acceptable. Today's decision may just put the Alar issue on the shelf rather than lock it away forever. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Washington.
An accused murderer is behind bars tonight after a long time on the run. His capture resulted from a collaborative effort between a sculptor and a television viewer. Betsy Aaron reports that seems to be a very effective combination.
John List was on the run for 18 years, accused of murdering his wife, 3 children, and his mother on a November night in 1971. Left behind were 2 guns and a confession.
The murders were meticulously planned to include calls to his children's school saying that they would be out of school for approximately a month.
It was the biggest story in this town ever, and it became sort of folklorish.
Westfield, New Jersey's police chief, now retired, never gave up hope that List would be caught.
I knew he was there, but I didn't know where.
Then 2 weeks ago, the television program America's Most Wanted dramatized the List murders.
We've progressed his balding pattern, and we believe he's grayed. There's a scar behind his right ear.
Forensic sculptor Frank Bender worked from a picture and from a psychological profile.
Also, people can relate to a sculpture, something in 3 dimension, a lot easier than a drawing.
The television program generated 200 calls. One of them hit the jackpot.
The caller says that he lived at an address in Midlothian, Virginia, and that he's a certified public accountant, and the caller said he attends church regularly.
From astonished neighbors in suburban Richmond, this.
I believe that he's a good person.
Yeah.
This is my feelings.
He was friendly. He'd stop and talk to me, talk to my little girl.
List had remarried, changed his name to Robert Clark, and resumed his CPA career. His new wife knew nothing of the crime. 4 of Bender's fugitive busts have been used in tracking criminals on television. 3 have been caught.
I'm very pleased with what I've done. The end kind of justified the means. They caught him.
If convicted, List could spend the rest of his life in jail with no hope of parole. The face of John E. List. In 1971, in 1989, and yesterday, when the FBI got its man. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, New York.
From Israel today say the army is getting ready to crack down on Jewish vigilantes in the occupied territories. The plan is to restrict the comings and goings of Jewish settlers who are suspected of attacking Palestinians. But as Bob Simon reports, not all these attacks have been aimed at Arabs.
There was a confrontation in Gaza today, but there was not an Arab in sight. Left-wing Israelis, peace activists, came down with food and medicine, a symbolic offering for Gaza's children. Right-wing Israelis, settlers from the occupied territories, decided to stop them. They tore down the sign, spilled out some food, cracked some heads as well. When it was all over and the settlers were driving home, they stoned the cars of some Arab workers who were returning to Gaza. Meanwhile, in a small West Bank village, Palestinians were mourning a 13-year-old girl shot dead this week by young settlers, religious students who were remanded in custody today. They'd been in the village, they said, because it's their right to be anywhere in the land of Israel. Settlers are marching for this alleged right in vigilante patrols all over the West Bank these days. They're afraid the Shamir government is preparing to sell them out in negotiations with the Palestinians. They're heavily armed, and the Israeli army seems powerless to stop them.
If they'll use force, it means a civil war, not just between Arabs and Israelis, but between Jews and Jews.
The leader of these Jewish settlers, Rabbi Moshe Levinger, is also awaiting trial. He's been accused of killing an Arab shopkeeper, a charge which has not diminished his support among right-wing politicians.
No Arab attempt to kill Jews will be let by. Everything we will act against every act of violence against us.
But even where the violence stops, suspicions are deepening. The Israeli settlement of Ariel ordered Arab workers to wear identification badges and only back down when Jews all over the world condemned it as a Nazi tactic. The hatred and animosity is spilling over from Jerusalem and the land of the Bible, where people have gotten used to it, and striking very close to home in very prosaic ways. The CBS News Bureau in Tel Aviv has just been notified by its landlord that Arab guards who've been working at the building for years are going to be fired now because they're Arabs. They will be replaced by Jews. Bob Simon, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
On Sunday, Poland will hold its first elections in which the ruling communists have had some opposition. Today, the candidates did some last-minute campaigning on television and at a special speaker's corner. Solidarity candidates are competing with the communists for every seat in the upper house of the Polish parliament and for a third of the seats in the lower house. Conservative estimate, but there's no such thing as a conservative estimate of the number of softball games that will be played this weekend across the country in playgrounds and pastures and vacant lots. Of those thousands and thousands of games, none, however, will be quite like the one Frank Courier now tells us about. The CBS Evening News. I'm Charles Kuralt, sitting in tonight for Dan Rather, who will be back on Monday. Good night.
Rocket fire now!
This is CBS.
Hello again, folks. I'm Steve Smith, and we're here.